When Harley first was talking to me about Walter, one of the stories he told me is he was like, dude, he said sometimes I hated working with him because he just was nonstop.
Triple H has named the 8 wrestlers who pissed him off. Not in a quiet room, not in a private conversation, on camera, in documentaries, in press interviews, and on live national television. The man who now runs WWE walked onto ESPN's First Take in September 2025, sat across from Stephen A. Smith, and heard Smith crown Goldberg as the greatest wrestler of all time. Triple H could not hide the look on his face. His eyes went wide. He accused Smith of doing a bait and switch, saying the whole thing was designed to piss off the maximum number of people, and Goldberg was just number 8. So who are all 8 names? What exactly did they do to earn that kind of real, deep, long-lasting heat from the man who now controls the biggest wrestling company on the planet? And these are the backstage stories that shaped entire careers, and in some cases ended them completely. Some of these men were slowed down, some were buried, some were frozen out of the company for years at a time. If you love this kind of real behind-the-scenes wrestling content, tap the hype feature right now and give this video some hype. It helps more wrestling fans find videos like this one. Now let us get into the full list, starting at number 8. Number 8 is Bill Goldberg. And to truly understand why Triple H had such a deep and lasting problem with him, you first need to understand what Triple H believed professional wrestling was actually supposed to be. Triple H, whose real name is Paul Levesque, built his entire identity around being a company guy. He studied the craft obsessively. He put in long hours every single week. He worked long matches and told stories inside the ring through careful pacing, precise timing, and deliberate body language. He read the crowd, adjusted the story, and made everything mean something by the time the final bell rang. By 2003, he was the world heavyweight champion and the leader of a group called Evolution, a 4-man faction that dominated the Raw brand together. He was also what people inside the wrestling industry call the gatekeeper. The gatekeeper is the person who, with or without any official title, controls who gets a real shot at the top and who quietly gets directed somewhere else. When Goldberg arrived in WWE in 2003, he came directly from World Championship Wrestling, known by most fans simply as WCW. In WCW, Goldberg had built one of the most famous unbeaten runs in professional wrestling history. So he would enter the arena to a wall of noise, walk to the ring with purpose, take a couple of moves from his opponent, then unload 2 or 3 massive moves of his own, and finish the match in under 3 minutes. Short, explosive, dominant every single time without exception. His whole identity was built around being an unstoppable natural force, and the crowd responded to it by going completely wild every time his music hit. Triple H had no respect for that identity. He reportedly called it the WCW attitude. He believed Goldberg viewed professional wrestling as nothing more than a showcase for toughness, a vehicle to project himself as a dangerous badass, without any real interest in the actual craft of storytelling that Triple H considered the heart of the business. Triple H valued something the industry calls work rate. Work rate describes how well a performer can wrestle a complete match from bell to bell, managing the pacing, building the action carefully, creating genuine dramatic moments, and earning the finish rather than simply arriving at it. By that standard, Triple H felt Goldberg was nowhere close to the level the business required of someone who deserved to be called great. That frustration was not kept behind closed doors. It showed up directly in how the matches were booked. Other performers who arrived in WWE from WCW during this period found ways to adapt. They adjusted their style, took longer matches, and gradually rebuilt their credibility under Triple H's standard. Goldberg had no interest in doing any of that. He was not going to change who he was or how he worked to satisfy anyone's philosophical preference. But he had been a champion in WCW using the exact approach he believed in, and he saw no reason to abandon it simply because he was now working in a different building. To Triple H, that attitude was exactly the problem. He interpreted it as stubbornness and arrogance dressed up as confidence. He saw a man who refused to grow because he thought growth was unnecessary, even while Goldberg was still being presented on screen as a dominant and nearly impossible to beat force. Triple H found ways to quietly chip away at that image. At SummerSlam 2003, inside a brutal multi-man match format called the Elimination Chamber, Triple H pinned Goldberg. Think about what that meant. Goldberg had looked like the most dangerous man in that match for most of its duration, but the final result had Triple H going over him regardless. And many of the most knowledgeable people watching professional wrestling at that time pointed directly to Triple H's backstage political political influence as the reason for that specific outcome. Political influence in wrestling means using your personal standing with management and your key relationships to shape who wins and who loses. At that time, Triple H had more of it than almost anyone in the company, and then the argument simply never ended. In September 2025, more than 2 full decades after their 2003 rivalry, Triple H sat on ESPN's First Take with Stephen A. Smith. Smith named Goldberg his all-time greatest wrestler on the entire list. Triple H pushed back immediately and without any hesitation. He called it a deliberate bait and switch, a pick calculated to create controversy rather than reflect any genuine ranking. And he said placing Goldberg above true legends like Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan completely ignored everything those men built through actual decades of technical mastery. He said he loved Goldberg as a performer, but that word performer said everything. Not a legend, not a great, a performer. 22 years after their first clash, same argument, same frustration, still running. That friction with Goldberg was rooted entirely in philosophy and in-ring ideology. Number 7 is Bret Hart. Bret Hart is one of the most respected performers in the entire history of this business. 5-time WWE champion, a technical master who could have a genuinely great match with virtually anyone on any given night in any arena. His reputation inside the wrestling industry was built over decades of consistent excellence. Triple H, who treated the craft as his religion, should have respected everything about him. Instead, Triple H reportedly found Hart to be bitter, resistant to modernizing, and fundamentally unwilling to do what the company needed. And by late 1997, that frustration became something far more serious than a backstage disagreement between two opinionated men. Most wrestling fans already know the general outline of the Montreal Screwjob. In November 1997, Bret Hart was the WWE champion and had signed a deal to leave and join WCW, the major rival company at that time. Vince McMahon needed the championship off Hart before he made his exit, but Hart refused to drop the title in Canada, his home country, in front of his own fans. The two sides were unable to find a finish they both agreed to. And so, at Survivor Series 1997 in the city of Montreal, while Hart was locked in a submission hold during his title match against Shawn Michaels, the referee rang the bell without any warning. The championship was declared won by Michaels. Hart had no idea it was coming. He was furious and made no attempt to hide it. He spat in the direction of McMahon from the ring. He punched McMahon backstage. He left WWE and spent years calling it the greatest professional betrayal of his career. For a long time, the story was understood as primarily involving Vince McMahon and Shawn Michaels. Then the 2024 Netflix documentary Mr. McMahon completely changed the picture. What made this revelation particularly damaging was not just what Triple H had done, it was how he framed it. He did not express regret. He described the planning meeting as a group of reasonable people dealing with an unreasonable situation. He positioned himself as the calm and strategic voice in the room, the one who understood that protecting the company's interests had to come before protecting any single performer's dignity. That framing angered many people who saw Bret Hart as someone who had given everything to WWE and deserved a basic level of honesty in return. In that documentary, Triple H admitted he had been in the room. He was part of the secret meeting where the Survivor Series finish was planned. He reportedly told McMahon directly that if Hart refused to drop the title before his departure, they should simply go behind his back. He described Hart as being unreasonable. He used the logic of business decisions to justify a betrayal. This is Triple H in his most revealing form, not the character on screen who attacks people with a sledgehammer. The actual man sitting quietly in a room, telling his boss to deceive one of the most loyal and dedicated performers the company had ever employed in its history. Bret Hart's response to this revelation was direct and unrestrained. In September 2025, at a public event in Manchester, England, Hart said openly that he wished he had knocked out Triple H in the dressing room alongside Vince McMahon. He called Triple H a phony. He called him Vince's hit guy. He said Triple H's entire career was built on backstage relationships and political maneuvering rather than authentic in-ring talent that he had actually earned. A public reconciliation had taken place in 2010. Handshakes, photographs, public statements about putting things behind them. Fans believed the chapter was finished, but at WrestleMania 41 in the 2025, television cameras clearly caught Bret Hart rolling his eyes during a moment on the stage involving Triple H. Whatever was said in 2010 did not undo what happened in that planning room nearly 3 decades earlier. That slow, quiet eye roll shows exactly what a Cold War looks like when it never truly ends. Number 6 is CM Punk, and this particular conflict blew up loudly and publicly in front of millions of people over a span of years. Phil Brooks, who wrestles under the name CM Punk, is probably the most fully documented example of what happens when someone with absolutely no patience for corporate structures runs runs directly into the most dedicated company man in the history of professional wrestling. And this is not one single incident. It is a full decade of building tension, public walkouts, personal insults delivered on national television, and a deeply cautious reunion that left neither man completely at ease. It started before Punk was even in WWE. When Punk was working in Ring of Honor, a smaller independent wrestling promotion, Triple H and his longtime circle of allies, known inside the industry as the Clique, were already watching Punk with open skepticism. One specific and often repeated complaint was about a move Punk performed called the Pepsi Plunge. And the Pepsi Plunge is essentially Triple H's own finishing move, the pedigree, done from the top rope rather than from the mat. Triple H reportedly found this deeply irritating. He interpreted it either as a lazy imitation of his own work or as a deliberate long-distance jab aimed directly at him. When Punk joined WWE, that remote skepticism became a daily reality in the workplace. Triple H publicly described Punk as difficult to work with. He said Punk always carried a chip on his shoulder that made collaborative storytelling inside the creative process almost impossible. Having a chip on your shoulder means you carry unresolved resentment and behave as though the system is always working against you, even when no one is actually targeting you. The moment that defined this rivalry publicly came in 2011. Punk was the hottest performer in the entire company, the one performer whose segments generated the loudest reactions and the most genuine excitement from the audience. He picked up a microphone and delivered what is now known in wrestling as the pipe bomb, a live promo that blurred the boundary between scripted storyline and real backstage grievance in a way the industry had rarely experienced. In that promo, Punk called Triple H the doofus son-in-law, directly referencing the fact that Triple H is married to Stephanie McMahon, the daughter of Vince McMahon, and suggesting that this relationship was the actual source of his power rather than any talent he had earned through years of work. The line landed across the entire wrestling world and then kept landing. But despite Punk being the most popular performer in WWE at that specific moment, he was booked to lose to Triple H at the Night of Champions pay-per-view. The storyline surrounding the loss featured mysterious, unexplained text messages and a sudden reappearance by a performer named Kevin Nash. Most fans found it confusing and unsatisfying. The overall feeling was that the entire arc had been constructed mainly to reassert Triple H's position at the center of the narrative rather than to let Punk's extraordinary momentum continue building. His popularity, which had reached an exceptional level, dropped noticeably after that loss. Then came 2014. After the Royal Rumble pay-per-view, Punk walked out of WWE without warning. He simply left the building and did not come back. Sweeney reports from that time said the plan had been to match Punk against Triple H at WrestleMania 30. Punk reportedly viewed this as Triple H using him to keep himself in a top spot at the single most important show of the year, at the expense of a full-time performer who was grinding through the schedule every single week of the year. On his way out of the building, Punk reportedly walked into Vince McMahon's office and insulted Triple H directly before leaving for good. That moment started a 10-year absence from the company. 10 complete years away from the place he had given everything to. The reunion came in late 2023, after Punk had a turbulent and public exit from a rival promotion called All Elite Wrestling. The door back to WWE opened. Triple H reportedly called Punk on a video call on Thanksgiving, and both men decided it was time to put the past behind them. They acknowledged that much of their old friction had been unnecessary and that they were more alike than different in how genuinely they cared about professional wrestling and what it could be. Punk came back at Survivor Series 2023 to one of the loudest crowd reactions the company had seen in years. But even after the return was fully done, Triple H was not completely at ease. Internal communications that surfaced during the 2023 TKO company merger showed Triple H had lingering concerns. He had reportedly expressed worry about Punk and Vince McMahon being on the same plane together shortly after the return was announced. The hatchet was buried, but Triple H still kept one hand near the shovel just in case. That need for absolute control over every narrative runs through this entire list. But to find where it truly began, you have to travel back almost 30 years to a young performer who was publicly embarrassed on the biggest stage in the history of professional wrestling. That takes us to number 5, The Ultimate Warrior. In 1996, Triple H was still building himself up from the bottom. He was performing as a snobbish, high society character named Hunter Hearst Helmsley. The locker room culture of that era had a very specific and rigid structure. Young performers were expected to earn their position through time and hard work. You paid your dues by doing the small things right, by putting over veterans when you were asked to, by contributing to the locker room without expecting anything back. That was the code Triple H believed in and lived by every day. When he was matched up against the Ultimate Ultimate Warrior, whose real name was Jim Hellwig, at WrestleMania 12, it should have been a meaningful career moment. WrestleMania is the Super Bowl of professional wrestling. Working with a name that legendary on that stage in front of that many people was supposed to help establish a younger performer and build their credibility. The match lasted 100 seconds. 100 seconds. Less than 2 minutes at the biggest show the business offers. The match was a squash, which in wrestling means one person wins so completely and so fast that the other person is made to look like they never posed any real threat at all. That person looking like no threat was Triple H. But the single most damaging moment came when Triple H hit his finishing move, the pedigree. In professional wrestling, a finisher is the big signature move that a performer uses to end their matches. The unwritten agreement between any two performers sharing a ring is that when you take someone's finisher, you sell it. You react as though it genuinely hurt. You stay down and give it weight. You protect your opponent's move the same way they would protect yours. That agreement is what makes professional wrestling work as a collaborative performance. The Warrior stood right back up. He took the pedigree, got to his feet as though nothing had happened at all, delivered his own signature moves, and finished the match. For a young performer trying to establish himself in front of a WrestleMania audience on national television, when having a returning legend no-sell your finisher in front of that crowd is one of the most demoralizing and professionally humiliating things that can happen during a career. Triple H did not move on from it easily. In his 2013 DVD called Thy Kingdom Come, he stated plainly that the Warrior did not give a damn about the business. That phrase, giving a damn about the business, was the central and highest standard by which Triple H measured every person in every locker room around him. The Warrior had failed it in the most visible way possible. Beyond the ring, the Warrior reportedly charged fees for what other performers gave freely as part of locker room courtesy, showed no interest in helping younger talent develop or feel welcome, and treated the entire locker room environment as something beneath his attention. He was there for himself. Full stop. This heat ran for close to 20 years. Triple H talked openly about the experience and what it had taught him. Then in 2014, in his role as a corporate executive, Triple H was instrumental in inducting the Warrior into the WWE Hall of Fame. There was a public moment of recognition between them. The grudge appeared to be formally put to rest. The Warrior passed away just 3 days after that ceremony. Whatever Triple H genuinely felt in private, the lesson from that 1996 WrestleMania moment stayed embedded in him permanently. If you do not give a damn about the business, if you show up to collect without contributing anything back, you become the enemy. Triple H carried that lesson into every conflict that followed on this list. Number 4, Scott Steiner. Scott Steiner was, at his peak, one of the most physically intimidating men in the entire history of professional wrestling. He had completely reinvented himself from a respected technical tag team specialist into a character called Big Papa Pump, a chain-wearing, muscle-bound, impossibly conditioned powerhouse who could fill any arena with energy and noise. He had the look. He had the ability to draw a reaction. On paper, putting him into a main event feud with Triple H for the World Heavyweight Championship in early 2003 should have been something worth watching. It was not something worth watching. Steiner entered WWE with a series of serious injuries to his legs and feet that had significantly limited his mobility inside the ring. Triple H reportedly became frustrated with Steiner's conditioning almost immediately after they began working together. Triple H operated on the belief that performing at the top level in this era required long, story-driven matches with careful build, clear drama, and 20 or more minutes of sustained physical output. Steiner could no longer deliver that, and Triple H had no patience for it. Their first pay-per-view match at the 2003 Royal Rumble is remembered as one of the worst championship contests the event has ever produced. Critical reaction was brutal and nearly universal. What made it worse were the reports from backstage during that period. Here's suggesting that Triple H was so frustrated with how the match was going that he deliberately sandbagged Steiner. In wrestling, sandbagging means you refuse to cooperate when your opponent is trying to lift or position you during a spot, making them look weak, slow, or out of sync in front of the entire paying audience. It is one of the most disrespectful acts one performer can direct at another inside a ring. Then the conflict moved into personal territory entirely. WWE reportedly asked Steiner to undergo a steroid test during this period. His response became genuine wrestling folklore. He told told the officials that he would take the test without hesitation, but only if Triple H personally came to pick him up in a limousine so they could both go together. The message was completely unmistakable. While Steiner was openly and publicly accusing Triple H of using performance-enhancing substances and being deliberately shielded from the same corporate scrutiny, no test was administered to either man. The subject disappeared from the conversation entirely, and no one pushed it further. The reason that condition was so effective was the timing and the context. Steiner was in a vulnerable position, and he knew it. He had been brought in with enormous expectations and had not delivered. Rather than accept the heat quietly, he turned it around and aimed it directly at the man who held all the power. Whether his accusation had merit or not, the move stopped the testing conversation dead in its tracks, and it told everyone watching exactly what kind of fight Steiner was willing to have. But the relationship between them never came close to recovering. Steiner spent years afterward in interviews attacking Triple H's career and his character with real intensity. Triple H dismissed Steiner as a performer who had simply failed to maintain the standard the company required. After that 2003 run, Steiner never again competed as a legitimate main event presence in WWE. His window closed, and Triple H's frustration was a meaningful factor in that door staying shut. From a career that hit a ceiling to a career that got quietly dismantled over 17 months because of one smile. Number 3, Paul London. In June 2007, WWE aired a segment on live television where Vince McMahon's limousine was shown exploding. The entire storyline was framed as a possible death of the McMahon character, a high-stakes, solemn narrative event designed to create genuine dramatic tension for the audience at home. The entire roster was lined up backstage and specifically told to stand in a row and look confused, worried, and concerned as McMahon walked past them toward the vehicle. Paul London, a talented, high-flying tag team performer known for his exciting work in the ring, was caught on live television with a wide, beaming smile, clearly visible on his face during that segment. Triple H reportedly found this completely and totally unacceptable. To Triple H, the television broadcast was something close to a sacred responsibility shared by every person on the roster. The moment you allow the audience to see that you are not treating the product with total seriousness, the moment you break the internal logic of what is happening on screen, you have caused genuine damage to everything the company works to build and maintain. London had violated the most fundamental principle in Triple H's personal professional code. London later explained fully what had actually happened during that filming. He said the segment had been filmed 9 or 10 times that evening, run over and over again through repeated takes. He described Vince McMahon's behavior during the filming as unusual and strange in specific ways that made maintaining a completely straight face increasingly difficult after that many repetitions under those circumstances. He was not being disrespectful intentionally. He was a human being who could not hold it together any longer after hours of the same moment repeated with McMahon behaving oddly in front of the entire roster. That explanation did not reach Triple H in a way that produced any different outcome. Reports from that era described Triple H as directly involved in what happened to London's career following that incident. London remained on the WWE roster for another 17 months, but his trajectory had effectively stopped. Opportunities no longer came. His position on the card did not move. He was released from the company in November 2008. London later referred to both Triple H and McMahon in interviews as sensitive millionaires who were easily and deeply offended by any talent that did not fully buy into the power structure and seriousness they had built around themselves. Number 2, Rob Van Dam. Rob Van Dam, known to wrestling fans everywhere as RVD, and was at the absolute height of his popularity between 2001 and 2002, following WWE's acquisition of both WCW and a promotion called ECW, and the arrival of their top performers into the WWE roster. RVD had one of the loudest and most consistent crowd reactions of any performer on the entire card during that stretch. During the Invasion storyline, where WCW and ECW talent worked against the main WWE roster, RVD was one of the few performers whose popularity transcended the storyline division. Fans of all backgrounds responded to him. He was genuinely exciting to watch, and his style was unlike anything else on the card. He connected with audiences in a way that felt completely real and unforced, not manufactured by any creative team. He did not win the World Heavyweight Championship during what became known as Triple H's reign of terror. In the period from roughly 2002 to 2005, when Triple H held or hovered around the title on Raw for an extraordinary and historically long stretch, that era is still remembered by fans as one of the most frustrating defining periods in company history, mainly because of how consistently popular performers kept being passed over for the top championship position. Triple H's problem with RVD was not about the quality of his work inside the ring. He reportedly acknowledged that RVD could perform. The issue was image, lifestyle, and what RVD represented to the outside world. RVD was openly and completely public about his marijuana use. He never hid it or softened it. His entire persona projected counterculture energy in every direction, from the way he carried himself in interviews to the self-high five he used as his trademark. So Triple H and management reportedly concluded that a performer projecting that kind of image was fundamentally wrong for the position of top representative of a corporate entertainment company worth billions of dollars. Triple H held a firm belief that whoever stood at the top of WWE needed to carry themselves with a specific level of seriousness and professionalism, and in his estimation, RVD simply did not match that standard. A physical incident made everything considerably worse. In a 2002 match, RVD accidentally caught Triple H in the throat while executing the five-star frog splash, his finishing move performed from the top rope. Triple H suffered a legitimate injury to his throat. After that incident, the word unsafe began circulating in backstage conversations about RVD with regularity. So Triple H and Vince McMahon reportedly concluded that a performer whose signature move carried that kind of risk could not be trusted in the position of world champion, representing the company at the top. Then the personal friction became impossible to ignore. Triple H reportedly pulled RVD aside at some point and offered to help him improve his promo work. A promo is the microphone speech a performer delivers to the audience to build characters and storylines. Triple H presented it as guidance and mentorship. RVD received it as a condescending insult from the exact person who stood between him and every championship opportunity he had been working toward. He rejected the offer without hesitation, and from that moment, the personal heat between them was established and locked in. RVD acknowledged years later that some of the responsibility for how things went belonged to him. He said his competitive drive and ego likely made the situation worse than it needed to be. He admitted he gave too much energy to things he should have let go. The last name on this list stands apart from every other name on it. Every other person eventually reached some form of resolution with Triple H, not this person. Number 1 is Shane Douglas, and this is the grudge with no ending anywhere in sight. Douglas is best known for his years in ECW, a smaller promotion known for violent and unpredictable matches, and an intensely rebellious identity that stood against everything the major companies represented. In ECW, Douglas played a character called the Franchise. He led a powerful group called the Triple Threat. One, he built his character around promo lines about ownership and dominance over the championship belt, and he was one of the most convincing and effective talkers in that entire company. He had a real audience that believed in him. He had a brief and deeply unsuccessful run in WWE in 1995, playing a snobbish schoolteacher character called Dean Douglas. The run was poorly set up from the beginning. He was injured in a match with other performers before he even had a real chance to establish himself, and he departed feeling strongly that the company had handed him a situation designed to fail. Triple H's description of Douglas was blunt and ungenerous. He said Douglas had been given every opportunity a performer could ask for, and had responded by pointing his finger at everyone around him every time something went wrong. In shoot interviews, which are candid, unscripted conversations where wrestlers speak about real backstage situations without the protection of storyline, Triple H reportedly called Douglas a snot-nosed moron. He said Douglas simply lacked the look, the work rate, and the professional mentality required to be a top star in WWE. Douglas had an entirely different account and was equally willing to share it at every opportunity. He spent years publicly accusing Triple H of directly stealing the Franchise character and building his own career on it. He pointed to specific and detailed similarities. Both men led major factions that became defining elements of their characters. Both made the transition from wrestling trunks to longer tights, which in wrestling represents a character shift from a basic competitor to a more polished and dangerous figure. And both used nearly identical promo language about personal ownership of the championship title. Douglas also claimed that Triple H's faction, DX, was originally going to be named the Triple Threat, but that the name had to be changed after ECW's Paul Heyman threatened legal action to protect the ECW property. Douglas described Triple H as a political animal who took the most powerful and effective ideas from the independent wrestling scene and then used his personal relationship with the McMahon family to push out anyone with enough standing or knowledge to challenge his originality. Triple H called Douglas a complainer with nothing real to offer. The loudest element of this entire story is not what was said by either man, it is what never happened. Shane Douglas never returned to WWE in any form, not as a one-night guest, list, not as a legend on a nostalgia card, not for a Hall of Fame ceremony or a special anniversary event. 30 years of documented heat, and the door to WWE has simply never opened for him in any capacity. Put on in an industry where lifelong enemies routinely reconcile on camera for financial reasons, and where old rivals return for one more moment in front of the crowd, the total and permanent exclusion of Shane Douglas is the loudest possible statement about exactly what kind of grudge Triple H is capable of maintaining and for exactly how long. 10 years of exile built on real insults, actual walkouts, and lasting damage on both sides that neither man could fully undo. And Triple H picked up the phone on Thanksgiving and made the call anyway. Not because it felt good, not because everything was forgiven or forgotten, but because it was the right move for the business and the company benefited directly from Punk coming back. That is the executive version of Triple H making a decision. The contrast between that Thanksgiving call and, say, the permanent exclusion of Shane Douglas tells you something important. Triple H in his executive role draws a very specific line. He can bury the hatchet with people who once had star power and whose return could generate a financial and cultural benefit for the company. But for the people who challenged his credibility, accused him of stealing ideas, or questioned his originality with no clear upside to reconciliation, the door simply stays shut. Even the evolution of Triple H has its own internal politics. Forgiveness, in his world, has a return on investment attached to it. Howdy spent 30 years developing his grudges into a precise and purposeful instrument. And somewhere along the way, through all the conflict and all the fallout, he learned when not to use it. Every one of the 8 names on this list taught him something valuable in the process of that conflict, whether they intended to or not. And professional wrestling in 2025 is shaped, at least in part, by every single one of those lessons. Drop a comment down below and tell us which of those 8 names surprised you the most on this entire list. And if you are not already subscribed, please hit that subscribe button right now, because brand new wrestling content like this drops every single week.